The leather binding cracked under Sophie's fingertips as she carefully opened the 1847 edition of Jane Eyre, and she wondered if anyone still cared about these forgotten treasures hidden in the dusty corners of Manhattan. Sophie Ashford had worked at Pemberton's Rare Books for 3 years, and most days felt like she was the guardian of a museum that nobody visited anymore. The shop occupied a narrow building squeezed between a coffee chain and a boutique hotel in the West Village, its worn wooden sign barely visible beneath the scaffolding that seemed permanently attached to the neighboring building. Inside, floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes, some dating back centuries, their spines faded and their pages yellowed with age. She was 26. With dark brown hair she usually twisted into a messy bun and green eyes that lit up whenever she talked about books. Her colleagues at the bookstore consisted of Mr. Pemberton himself, a 70-year-old man who spent most of his time napping in the back office, and Rita, a part-timer who only worked weekends. That meant Sophie ran the place most days, which suited her fine. She loved the quiet, the smell of old paper, the way afternoon light filtered through the front windows and illuminated dust motes floating in the air. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Sophie from her inspection of the Bronte novel. She looked up to see a man stepping inside, and her first thought was that he seemed too polished for their shabby little shop. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, and his dark hair was styled in that effortlessly neat way that probably required expensive products. He looked to be in his early 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp features and intense blue eyes that swept across the shop with obvious interest. "Good afternoon," Sophie said, setting the Jane Eyre carefully on the counter. "Can I help you find something?" The man turned his attention to her and something in his expression softened. "I hope so. I'm looking for first editions, particularly anything from the Romantic period. Poetry, novels, essays." Sophie felt a flutter of excitement. Serious collectors were rare these days. "We have quite a collection. Are you looking for anything specific, or would you like to browse? I would love a guide if you have the time." His voice was deep and measured, the kind of voice that commanded attention in boardrooms, though Sophie had no way of knowing that. Of course. She came around the counter, wiping her dusty hands on her jeans. She was acutely aware that she was wearing her oldest pair of sneakers and a faded NYU sweatshirt, not exactly professional attire, but Mr. Pemberton had never cared about dress codes. "I'm Sophie, by the way." "Benjamin," he said, extending his hand. "Benjamin Abbott." His handshake was firm and warm, and Sophie felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. She pulled her hand back quickly, suddenly flustered. "Right. Well, Benjamin, let me show you what we have." She led him to the back corner of the shop, where they kept the most valuable inventory, climate-controlled and carefully organized. As she pulled out volumes and described their provenance, Benjamin listened with genuine fascination, asking intelligent questions and handling each book with a reverence that matched her own. "This is remarkable," he said, examining a first edition of Wordsworth's lyrical ballads. "I've been looking for this for months. It just came in last week," Sophie said. "Estate sale in Connecticut. The family had no idea what they had, and now it's here." He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You clearly love what you do." Sophie felt heat rise to her cheeks. Books are easier than people sometimes. He laughed at that, a genuine sound that transformed his serious face. "I understand that sentiment more than you know." They spent over an hour together, and Benjamin ended up purchasing the Wordsworth along with a pristine copy of Coleridge's poems and a leather-bound collection of Keats. The total came to just over $8,000, and he handed over his credit card without blinking. As Sophie wrapped the books in protective paper, She snuck glances at him. There was something magnetic about Benjamin Abbott, something that went beyond his obvious good looks and expensive clothes. He seemed genuinely passionate about literature, and when their eyes met across the counter, she felt that flutter again. "I'll be back," he said as he collected his purchases. "I have a feeling you have more treasures to show me." "We get new inventory all the time," Sophie managed to say, trying to sound professional and not like her heart was racing. After he left, she stood at the counter for a long moment, staring at the door. Rita would have told her to look him up online to see if she could find out more about him, but Sophie resisted the urge. There was something nice about not knowing, about letting someone be mysterious. Benjamin did come back. 3 days later, in fact, just as Sophie was opening the shop on a crisp October morning, she was surprised to see him waiting outside, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I took a guess," he said, offering her one. "Latte with an extra shot. How did you know?" Sophie asked, accepting the cup with surprise. "You have the look of someone who needs extra caffeine to face the morning." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and Sophie felt that now familiar flutter. "That's disturbingly accurate," she admitted, unlocking the door and letting them both inside. This became their pattern. Benjamin would visit 2 or 3 times a week, always in the morning, often bringing coffee. Sometimes he bought books. Sometimes he just browsed and talked with Sophie about literature, history, art. She learned that he had studied English literature at Yale before getting an MBA, that he loved hiking and had climbed mountains on 3 continents, that his mother had been a librarian and had instilled in him a deep love of books. What she did not learn was what he did for a living. He was always vague about work, mentioning meetings and travel but never specifics. Sophie assumed he was probably a lawyer or worked in finance, something that paid well enough to afford his obvious wealth, but was too boring to discuss. She did not push, because she liked the bubble they existed in, where they could talk about Byron and Shelley and forget about the outside world. Weeks passed, and Sophie found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that surprised her. She started paying more attention to what she wore, swapping her usual jeans and sweatshirts for nicer pants and fitted sweaters. She wore her hair down more often, and even put on mascara some mornings, though she told herself it had nothing to do with Benjamin. "You're glowing," Rita observed one Saturday, giving Sophie a knowing look. "Is this about that gorgeous man who keeps coming in?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Sophie said, but she could not stop the smile that spread across her face. "Oh, honey, you're gone for him." Rita laughed. "Has he asked you out yet?" "It's not like that. He's a customer." "A customer who brings you coffee and looks at you like you hung the moon." Rita shook her head. "If you don't make a move soon, I will." But Sophie was not sure how to make a move or if she even should. Benjamin was clearly wealthy and sophisticated, probably used to dating models and socialites. What would he want with a bookstore clerk who spent her evenings reading alone in her tiny studio apartment? Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in late November, and snow was starting to fall outside, the first of the season. Sophie was arranging a new display of vintage Christmas books when Benjamin walked in, but something was different. He looked tense, distracted, and he was not alone. A woman in a sharp business suit followed him, talking rapidly into a phone. "I need 10 minutes, Benjamin said to the woman, his voice tight. "Mr. Abbott, the board meeting starts in 30 minutes, the woman said, lowering her phone. "We really need to go." 10 minutes, Claire." There was steel in his voice, and the woman nodded and stepped back outside. Benjamin walked over to Sophie, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I'm sorry, I can't stay today." "That's okay," Sophie said, confused by the tension radiating off him. Is everything all right?" He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Sophie, I need to tell you something. I should have told you before, but I liked that you didn't know, that you just saw me as a person and not as—" He broke off, shaking his head. "I'm not just a book collector. I'm the CEO of Abbott Industries. I'm a billionaire, Sophie, and I should have been honest with you from the start." Sophie stared at him, trying to process this information. Abbott Industries. Even she, who paid almost no attention to business news, had heard of Abbott Industries. They were one of the largest investment firms in the world, managing billions in assets. And Benjamin Abbott was not just wealthy, he was one of the richest men in the country. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because every time I tell someone, everything changes. They start seeing dollar signs instead of me. But with you, I could just be Benjamin, a guy who loves old books." He stepped closer. "These past few weeks talking with you have been the best part of my days, and I hope that you felt something too." Sophie's mind was reeling. The man she had been falling for was a billionaire. It seemed impossible, absurd. But looking at him now, she could see the truth in his eyes and also fear. He was afraid she would treat him differently now. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is a lot to take in." Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. "I understand. I'm sorry for not being honest sooner." He turned to leave, then looked back. "For what it's worth, everything else was real. My love for books, our conversations, the way I feel when I'm with you, that was all real." After he left, Sophie sank onto the stool behind the counter, her legs suddenly weak. She felt like she had been living in a novel and just discovered the plot twist. Benjamin Abbott, billionaire CEO, had been visiting her shabby little bookstore and bringing her coffee and talking about poetry, and he had feelings for her. He had essentially just confessed his feelings, had not he? She pulled out her phone and, for the first time, Googled him. The results were overwhelming. Pages and pages of articles, photos from charity galas and business conferences, profiles in Forbes and Fortune. Benjamin Abbott, 33 years old, had taken over his family's investment firm at 28 after his father's sudden death, and had tripled its value in 5 years. He was known for being brilliant, ruthless in business, and intensely private. There were photos of him with various beautiful women at events, but according to the gossip sites, he had been single for over a year. Sophie spent the rest of the day in a daze. Part of her was angry that he had not been honest, but another part understood why he had kept his identity secret. She thought about how natural and easy things had been between them, how he had never made her feel inferior or uncomfortable. He had treated her as an equal, had been genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. By the time she closed up the shop that evening, she knew what she had to do. She could not let fear push away something that might be real. But she did not have his phone number, and she was not about to call Abbott Industries and try to get through to him. Instead, she did something impulsive. She looked up his office address and took the subway uptown to the gleaming tower in Midtown that housed his company's headquarters. The lobby was all marble and steel, intimidating in its corporate perfection. Sophie walked up to the security desk, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked in her winter coat and boots. "I need to see Benjamin Abbott," she said to the guard. The man looked at her skeptically. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm a friend. My name is Sophie Ashford." "I'm sorry, but Mr. Abbott doesn't see anyone without an appointment." Sophie was about to argue when a voice behind her said, "It's all right, Marcus. I'll take her up." She turned to see Claire, the woman who had been with Benjamin that morning. Up close, she was younger than Sophie had thought, maybe 30, with kind eyes despite her intimidating efficiency. "You're Sophie from the bookstore," Claire said. It was not a question. Yes, I need to talk to Benjamin. I mean, Mr. Abbott. Claire smiled slightly. He's been impossible all day. Come on. The elevator ride to the 45th floor was silent, and Sophie's nerves increased with every floor they passed. What was she doing? This was crazy. But then Claire was leading her through a maze of glass-walled offices to a large corner suite, and before Sophie could change her mind, she was standing in Benjamin's office. He was at his desk, jacket off and tie loosened, staring at a computer screen with a frown. When he looked up and saw her, he stood so quickly his chair rolled back and hit the window behind him. "Sophie." "I'll leave you two alone," Claire said, stepping out and closing the door. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the expanse of his office. Then Sophie said, "You should have told me, I know. But I understand why you didn't." She took a step closer. "These past few weeks have been the best part of my days, too, and when you walked into the shop this morning looking stressed and unhappy, all I wanted to do was make it better. I don't care about the money or the company or any of that. I care about the man who brings me coffee and gets excited about first editions and makes me laugh." Benjamin moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. "I was afraid I had ruined everything." "You almost did by not trusting me with the truth." Sophie looked up at him, her heart pounding. "But I'm willing to start over if you are. Hi, I'm Sophie Ashford. I work at a rare bookstore and I'm probably falling in love with you." His face transformed, that serious expression giving way to pure joy. "Hi, I'm Benjamin Abbott. I'm definitely falling in love with you." When he kissed her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like all those weeks of talking and laughing and dancing around their feelings had led inevitably to this moment. Sophie wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, not caring that they were in his office, that anyone could see through the glass walls. All that mattered was that this was real, and he was real, and they were taking a leap together. When they finally broke apart, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "Have dinner with me tonight, not as a collector and a bookstore clerk, but as ourselves." "I'd like that," Sophie said. That dinner turned into many dinners, and those dinners turned into a relationship that surprised them both with its intensity. Benjamin was not like anyone Sophie had dated before. He was confident and decisive, but also thoughtful and surprisingly romantic. He took her to the best restaurants in the city, but also seemed perfectly happy eating pizza on her apartment floor while she told him about the books she was reading. He introduced her to his world slowly, bringing her to a charity gala where she wore a borrowed dress and felt completely out of her depth, until he took her hand and whispered, "You're the most beautiful woman here, and the only one I want to talk to." Sophie introduced him to her friends, a small group of fellow book lovers and grad students, and Benjamin fit in seamlessly, discussing literature and philosophy, and never once mentioning his wealth or status. He was just Benjamin, and her friends adored him. The holidays approached, and Sophie found herself navigating new territory. Benjamin wanted her to spend Thanksgiving with his family at their estate in Connecticut, but she had always spent it with her mom and younger brother in New Jersey. They compromised, spending Thursday with her family and Friday with his. Thanksgiving with the Ashfords was chaotic and warm. Sophie's mom, Linda, was a high school teacher with a big laugh and an even bigger heart. Her brother, Tommy, was 22 and in his last year of college, and he wasted no time interrogating Benjamin about everything from his intentions toward Sophie to his opinion on the Yankees versus the Mets. "I like him," Tommy declared after dinner, pulling Sophie aside while Benjamin helped their mom with dishes. "He's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Sophie asked. "I don't know. Someone more arrogant, I guess, but he seems really normal." and he looks at you like you're the only person in the room. The next day, driving to the Abbott estate, Sophie felt her nerves returning. Benjamin had told her his family was small, just his mother and younger sister, but she was still anxious about making a good impression. The estate was exactly what she had imagined. Sprawling and elegant, with manicured lawns and a house that looked like something out of a magazine. Benjamin's mother, Caroline Abbott, was a petite woman in her early 60s with Benjamin's blue eyes and a warm smile that immediately put Sophie at ease. "Finally," Caroline said, embracing Sophie. "I have been begging Benjamin to bring you by. He talks about you constantly." "Mom," Benjamin said, looking embarrassed. His sister Brielle was 30 and worked as a pediatric surgeon. She was tall and confident with a sharp wit that reminded Sophie of Benjamin. "It's true," Brielle said. "At our last family dinner, he spent an hour telling us about some bookbinding technique you explained to him. It was adorable. The day was lovely, filled with good food and easy conversation." Caroline wanted to hear all about Sophie's work, and she shared stories about her years as a librarian and how she had raised her children to love reading. After dinner, Benjamin took Sophie on a walk through the grounds, showing her the gardens and the small lake behind the house. "Your family is wonderful," Sophie said, taking his hand. "They're crazy about you," Benjamin replied. "My mom pulled me aside and told me not to screw this up." Sophie laughed. "Good advice." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I know it's only been a couple of months, but I need you to know something. I'm serious about this about us. I know my life is complicated and there are aspects of it that are going to be challenging, but I want you in it. Permanently." Sophie's heart swelled. "I want that too. You've become so important to me so quickly, and it's terrifying and wonderful at the same time." "Terrifying and wonderful," Benjamin repeated. "That's a good description." As winter settled over New York, their relationship deepened. Benjamin was often busy with work, but he made time for Sophie, carving out hours in his schedule to visit the bookstore or take her to dinner, or just spend quiet evenings together. Sophie learned to navigate his world, attending business dinners and social events where she met powerful people who all seemed to defer to Benjamin. It was surreal sometimes, but Benjamin never made her feel like she did not belong. The media attention was harder to handle. Once gossip sites picked up on Benjamin Abbott's new girlfriend, Sophie found herself the subject of speculation and scrutiny. There were photographers outside the bookstore and unflattering articles that questioned why a billionaire would date someone so ordinary. Benjamin was furious about the coverage and had his legal team send cease and desist letters to the worst offenders. But Sophie knew it was just part of his life. "I'm sorry," he said one night after a particularly nasty article had been published, complete with an unflattering photo of Sophie walking to work. "I hate that they're doing this to you." "It's not your fault," Sophie said, though she had cried in the bathroom at work after reading the article. "I knew this would happen. I just have to develop a thicker skin." "You shouldn't have to." Benjamin pulled her close. "You're brilliant and kind and beautiful, and anyone who can't see that is an idiot." His words helped, and so did the support of her friends and family. Her mom called regularly to check on her, and Tommy sent ridiculous memes to make her laugh. Rita appointed herself Sophie's unofficial bodyguard at the bookstore, shooing away photographers with remarkable efficiency. As January arrived, Benjamin started acting strangely. He was distracted during their dinners, and Sophie caught him staring at her with an odd expression more than once. She started to worry that he was having second thoughts, that the media attention and complications of their relationship were too much. Then, on a cold Saturday morning, Benjamin showed up at her apartment at 8 in the morning, which was unusual. He normally let her sleep in on weekends. "Get dressed," he said, bouncing on his heels with barely contained energy. "Warm clothes. I have a surprise." "Benjamin, it's 8 in the morning," Sophie groaned, but she was smiling. "Trust me." An hour later, they were in a helicopter flying over Manhattan. Sophie had never been in a helicopter before, and she gripped Benjamin's hand tightly as the city spread out beneath them. They flew north, following the Hudson River, and eventually landed on a snowy hilltop somewhere in upstate New York. A car was waiting for them, and Benjamin drove them to a beautiful old house overlooking a frozen lake. It was built of stone and wood, with large windows and a wide porch. "What is this place?" Sophie asked as Benjamin led her inside. It was a private library, built in the 1920s by a millionaire who loved books. "It's been empty for years, just sitting here." He watched her face as she took in the soaring ceilings, the built-in shelves lining every wall, the massive fireplace. "I bought it." Sophie turned to stare at him. "You bought it? Why?" "Because I want to turn it into something special. A foundation, maybe, or a public library. A place where people can come and experience books the way they're meant to be experienced." He took her hands. "And I want you to run it." "What?" Sophie felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. "You're wasted at Pemberton's, Sophie. You have so much knowledge and passion, and you should be using it to build something meaningful. This could be yours, our project together." Benjamin was talking faster now, excited. "We could host events, bring in scholars, create programs for kids. Whatever you want, I'll fund it all. I just want to see what you can do when you have real resources." Sophie walked through the space, her mind reeling. It was spectacular, the kind of place she had dreamed about but never thought she would actually see. And Benjamin was offering it to her, believing in her enough to invest in her vision. "This is too much," she said finally. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because it's a whole building, Benjamin. It's a massive project. What if I fail?" He came to stand in front of her. "You won't fail. You're one of the smartest, most capable people I know. And I'm not doing this to pressure you or to show off. I'm doing it because I believe in you, and because I want to build a life with you. A life where we're partners in every sense." Tears pricked Sophie's eyes. "You really think I could do this?" "I know you can." He cupped her face in his hands. "Say yes, Sophie. Take a leap with me." She thought about the bookstore, about Mr. Pemberton and the dusty shelves and the quiet days. She loved it there, but Benjamin was right. She had bigger dreams, dreams she had pushed aside because they seemed impossible. Now he was making them possible, and all she had to do was be brave enough to reach for them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll do it." Benjamin's whoop of joy echoed through the empty building, and then he was spinning her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, and Sophie felt like her life was splitting into before and after this moment. The next few months were a whirlwind. Sophie gave notice at Pemberton's, and Mr. Pemberton, far from being upset, told her he had been hoping she would move on to bigger things. They hired Rita full-time to replace her, and Sophie spent her last weeks training her replacement and saying goodbye to the place that had been her sanctuary. Meanwhile, she worked with architects and designers on the library project, which they named the Ashford Abbott Literary Foundation. Benjamin had insisted her name come first, and Sophie had been too emotional to argue. She hired a small staff, reaching out to people she had met over the years in the rare book world, and slowly the vision began to take shape. Through it all, Benjamin was her partner and biggest cheerleader. He sat through meetings with contractors and gave input on designs, but he always deferred to Sophie's judgment. He was teaching her about budgets and management, sharing the business knowledge he had accumulated over years, and Sophie soaked it all in. Their relationship grew stronger through the work. They spent long hours together, debating paint colors and program ideas, and sometimes they would stop in the middle of a discussion to just kiss each other, amazed that this was their life now. Sophie moved out of her tiny studio and into Benjamin's penthouse apartment, and waking up next to him every morning felt like a gift. In May, almost exactly a year after they had first met, the foundation was ready for its soft opening. They hosted a small event for friends and family, and Sophie gave a speech about her vision for the space. Looking out at the crowd, her mom crying with pride, Tommy giving her a thumbs up, Caroline and Brielle beaming, and Benjamin watching her with so much love in his eyes, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. After the event, as they were locking up for the night, Benjamin pulled her into the main reading room. The space was dimly lit, just a few lamps casting warm pools of light on the polished wood floors. "I have one more surprise," he said, and Sophie noticed he seemed nervous, which was rare for him. "Benjamin, you've already given me so much. This is different." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, and Sophie's breath caught. "Sophie Ashford, you walked into my life a year ago and changed everything. You see me, the real me, not the money or the title. You challenge me and support me and make me laugh. You're my best friend and the love of my life." He opened the box to reveal a stunning vintage ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds. "I found this at an estate sale last month, and I knew it was meant for you. Marry me, Sophie. Build this life with me. Let's fill this library with books and fill our home with love and see what else we can create together." Sophie was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she managed to say. "Yes, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. When he kissed her, Sophie felt like every chapter of her life had led to this moment, and now a new story was beginning. They were married in September in the gardens of Benjamin's family estate. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family, exactly what they both wanted. Sophie wore a simple ivory dress, and Benjamin could not stop smiling the entire day. Tommy was his best man, and Brielle was Sophie's maid of honor, and when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, everyone cheered. The reception was held in the foundation's main hall, surrounded by books and history, and the future they were building together. Sophie's mom gave a touching speech about how proud she was, and Caroline welcomed Sophie officially into the Abbott family. Benjamin's toast was simple and heartfelt. "To Sophie, who taught me that the best things in life aren't bought, they're found in dusty bookstores when you least expect them." That night, lying in bed in the honeymoon suite of a hotel before they left for 2 weeks in Italy, Sophie traced patterns on Benjamin's chest and thought about the past year. It felt like a fairy tale, except it was better because it was real. She had found love in the most unexpected place with the most unexpected person, and now they had a whole life ahead of them. "What are you thinking?" Benjamin asked, his voice sleepy. "That I'm happy," Sophie said simply. "Completely, overwhelmingly happy." "Good." He kissed the top of her head. "That's all I ever want for you." The Italian honeymoon was perfect. 2 weeks of Venice and Florence and Rome, eating incredible food and seeing art and making love in beautiful hotel rooms. Benjamin was a generous and attentive husband, and Sophie felt like she was discovering new layers to him every day. He spoke passable Italian, which he had learned during a semester abroad in college, and he delighted in ordering for them at restaurants and charming waiters. Sophie took hundreds of photos, not just of the sights but of Benjamin, wanting to capture every expression and moment. They returned to New York in October to find the foundation thriving. Sophie's staff had handled everything perfectly in her absence, and there were already programs scheduled through the end of the year. They had visiting scholars coming to study the collection, school groups booked for educational tours, and a waiting list for their evening lecture series. Life settled into a new rhythm. Sophie spent her weekdays at the foundation, growing more confident in her role as director. Benjamin continued to run Abbott Industries, but he had started delegating more, making time for the things that mattered. They had dinner together almost every night, either at home or at one of their favorite restaurants, and they spent weekends at the foundation or visiting family or exploring the city together. In December, at their first Christmas as a married couple, Sophie gave Benjamin a present that made him tear up. A first edition of his favorite book, The Great Gatsby, which she had tracked down through her rare book contacts. He gave her a leather journal, handmade in Florence, with their initials embossed on the cover. "For writing your own story," he said. "I want to know what you're thinking, dreaming, hoping for." Sophie had never been much of a journal keeper, but she started writing in it every night, documenting their life together. The small moments and the big ones, the challenges and the triumphs, the way Benjamin made her coffee every morning and the way she could make him laugh with terrible puns. The new year brought changes. In February, Caroline Abbott was diagnosed with breast cancer, and the family rallied around her. Sophie went with Benjamin to doctor appointments and sat with Caroline during chemotherapy treatments, reading to her from books and keeping her spirits up. The experience brought Sophie and Caroline even closer, and one day Caroline squeezed Sophie's hand and said, "I'm so grateful Benjamin found you. You're exactly what our family needed." Caroline's prognosis was good, and by spring she was in remission, thinner and tired but determined to beat the disease. The family celebrated with a big dinner, and Caroline announced that she wanted to do something meaningful with her recovery. She volunteered at the foundation, using her library experience to help develop programs, and Sophie loved having her there. In June, Sophie and Benjamin celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at the restaurant where they had their first official date. They exchanged gifts. Sophie gave him a rare book of poetry he had mentioned wanting, and he gave her a beautiful necklace, but the best gift was simply being together, looking back on a year of marriage and forward to all the years to come. "I want to start trying," Sophie said over dessert, her heart pounding. "Trying what?" Benjamin asked, confused. "For a baby." Sophie watched his face carefully. They had talked about kids in abstract terms, but this felt like making it real. Benjamin's expression transformed, joy and excitement and a little bit of fear all mixing together. "Really? You're ready?" "I think so. Are you?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been ready since I married you. I can't wait to see you as a mother." They started trying, and Sophie discovered that this part of their journey was both exciting and frustrating. The first few months brought disappointment, and Sophie found herself obsessing over cycles and symptoms. Benjamin was patient and supportive, reminding her that these things took time, but she could see he wanted it as much as she did. In September, 2 years after their wedding, Sophie took a pregnancy test and saw 2 lines appear. She stared at it for a long moment, almost afraid to believe it, then took 3 more tests just to be sure. All positive. She told Benjamin that night by wrapping up one of the tests and giving it to him as a present. He looked confused when he opened the box, then his eyes went wide as he understood. "Really?" he whispered, looking up at her with wonder. "We're having a baby. We're having a baby," Sophie confirmed, and then she was in his arms and they were both crying and laughing at the same time. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Sophie spent the first trimester exhausted and nauseous. Benjamin was an attentive soon-to-be father, going to every appointment and reading every book about pregnancy and childbirth he could find. He talked to Sophie's growing belly every night, telling their baby about the books they would read together and the places they would visit. They decided not to find out the gender, wanting it to be a surprise. Benjamin set up a nursery in one of the spare bedrooms of their apartment, painting it a soft yellow and filling it with books and stuffed animals. Sophie's mom threw her a baby shower, and all their friends and family came, showering them with gifts and advice. In May, 3 years after they had first met, Sophie went into labor. It was long and difficult, 20 hours of contractions and pushing, and there were moments when Sophie thought she could not do it. But Benjamin was there the whole time, holding her hand and encouraging her, and finally their baby was born. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, and then their son was placed on Sophie's chest, tiny and red and perfect. They named him Oliver James Abbott, and he had Benjamin's blue eyes and Sophie's dark hair. Benjamin cried when he held Oliver for the first time, overwhelmed with love and responsibility and joy. Sophie watched her husband cradle their son and felt her heart might burst. The first few months were exhausting. Oliver was a good baby but still needed constant care, and Sophie and Benjamin took turns with feedings and diaper changes, and the endless rocking and soothing. Sophie took a leave from the foundation, and Benjamin cut back his hours at work, both of them wanting to be present for these early days. They figured it out together, learning Oliver's cues and rhythms, marveling at every new sound and expression. Benjamin was a natural father, patient and gentle, and seeing him with Oliver made Sophie fall in love with him all over again. When Oliver was 6 months old, Sophie returned to work part-time, and they hired a nanny to help during the day. It was hard to leave Oliver, but Sophie found she was ready to engage with the foundation again, and the balance felt right. She worked in the mornings and came home for lunch to nurse Oliver, then worked a few more hours in the afternoon before taking over baby duties so Benjamin could finish his own work. They had found their rhythm as a family, and life was full and beautiful and occasionally overwhelming. There were nights when they were both so tired they could barely speak, and mornings when Oliver woke them up before dawn. But there were also moments of pure joy: Oliver's first smile, his first laugh, the way he would calm down when Benjamin sang to him. On their 4th wedding anniversary, they had a quiet dinner at home after putting Oliver to bed. They were both exhausted but happy. 4 years, Sophie said, leaning against Benjamin on the couch. "Can you believe it? Best 4 years of my life," Benjamin said. He kissed her temple. "Though I'll admit I did not anticipate spending our anniversary covered in baby spit up." Sophie laughed. "It's glamorous, isn't it?" "It's perfect," Benjamin said seriously. "You're perfect. Our family is perfect. I wouldn't change a single thing." Sophie looked around their apartment, at the photos on the walls and the baby toys scattered on the floor, and the life they had built together. She thought about that day 4 years ago when Benjamin had walked into the bookstore, how she could never have imagined where it would lead. "I love you," she said. "Thank you for finding me in that dusty little bookshop." "Thank you for seeing me," Benjamin replied, "for loving me even after you found out the truth." "The truth made me love you more," Sophie said, "because I realized you trusted me enough to be vulnerable." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Then Oliver's cry came through the baby monitor and they both sighed. "My turn," Benjamin said, getting up. "You sit and relax." Sophie watched him go, then picked up the journal he had given her for Christmas years ago. She flipped through the pages, reading entries from their early days together, their wedding, Oliver's birth. Then she picked up a pen and started to write. She wrote about the ordinary magic of their life, about how love was not always grand gestures and dramatic moments. Sometimes it was Benjamin changing a diaper at 3 in the morning, or the way he still brought her coffee even though they lived together now. It was building a foundation, and a family, and a life that was uniquely theirs. Sophie wrote until Benjamin came back with Oliver, who was wide awake and alert. They sat together, passing their son back and forth, talking softly about nothing and everything. This was not what Sophie had imagined when she was a lonely bookstore clerk dreaming about romance, but it was so much better than anything she could have imagined. Years passed, measured in Oliver's growth and milestones. First steps and first words, starting preschool and making friends. Sophie and Benjamin navigated parenthood together, making decisions about education and screen time and discipline, sometimes disagreeing but always working through it. The foundation continued to thrive, expanding its programs and collections. Benjamin remained involved with Abbott Industries, but had stepped back from day-to-day operations, appointing a president to handle most of the management so he could focus on strategic direction and have more time for family. When Oliver was 3, they started talking about having another baby. Sophie was 32 now, Benjamin was 38, and they both felt ready to expand their family again. The trying was easier this time, less stressful because they had Oliver to focus on, and they knew what to expect. Sophie got pregnant in the fall, and this time they decided to find out the gender. At the ultrasound, the technician smiled and said, "It's a girl." Benjamin squeezed Sophie's hand so hard it hurt, and when she looked at him, he had tears in his eyes. "A daughter," he said softly. "We're having a daughter." They told Oliver he was going to be a big brother, and he was excited in the way only a 3-year-old could be, asking if the baby could come out and play with him right away. They let him help pick out nursery decorations and talk to Sophie's belly, and he would put his ear against her stomach trying to hear his sister. Ella Marie Abbott was born in June on a sunny morning after a much shorter labor than Oliver's. She came out screaming, strong and healthy, with a shock of dark hair and Sophie's green eyes. Oliver, meeting his sister for the first time, reached out one finger to touch her hand and said, "Hi, baby Ella. I'm your big brother." Life with 2 children was chaos. There was always someone needing something, always laundry to do and meals to prepare and questions to answer. But it was also filled with laughter and love and moments that took Sophie's breath away. Watching Benjamin read bedtime stories to both kids, Oliver snuggled on one side and Ella on the other. Coming home to find him building block towers with Oliver while Ella napped in a carrier strapped to his chest. The way their family fit together, messy and imperfect and absolutely right. On their 7th anniversary, they went back to the foundation for a special dinner. They had arranged for Benjamin's mom to watch the kids, and it was their first night away from both children. The foundation was closed for the evening, just the 2 of them in the beautiful space they had created together. 7 years, Benjamin said, pouring them wine. "I feel like I should make a speech." "Please do," Sophie said, smiling. "When I walked into that bookstore, I was looking for first editions. I had no idea I was going to find so much more." He took her hand. "You've given me everything, Sophie. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just making money. You've made me a better man." "You were already a good man," Sophie said. "I just helped you see it. We've built something amazing together," Benjamin continued. "This foundation, our family, our life, and I want to keep building with you for the next 70 years. "Only 70, Sophie teased. "Fine, 80. "However long I get with you, it won't be enough." They danced to music playing softly from Benjamin's phone, moving slowly around the main hall. Sophie rested her head on his chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong. This was what happiness felt like, she thought. Not the fairy tale kind with perfect moments and no struggles, but the real kind, built on years of choosing each other every day. More years passed. Oliver started elementary school, curious and bright, loving books as much as his parents. Ella was a whirlwind of energy and opinions, keeping them all on their toes. Benjamin's company continued to grow, and he was regularly featured in business magazines, though he still hated the publicity. Sophie's foundation became nationally recognized, receiving grants and awards, and she was invited to speak at conferences about her work. Through it all, they remained partners. They still had date nights when they could arrange childcare, still talked for hours about books and life and their dreams. They argued sometimes, usually about small things like whose turn it was to handle bath time or whether Oliver was old enough for a certain privilege. But they always worked through it, always came back to the foundation of love and respect they had built. When Oliver was 10 and Ella was 7, Benjamin came home one day with an announcement. "I'm stepping down as CEO," he said over family dinner. Sophie nearly dropped her fork. "What? Why?" "Because I don't want to miss any more of this," he said, gesturing around the table at their family. "I've been thinking about it for a while, and I realized I don't need to run the company anymore. I can stay on the board, be involved in major decisions, but day-to-day management can go to someone else. I want more time for the foundation, for the kids, for you." "Are you sure?" Sophie asked, though her heart was soaring. "I've never been more sure of anything." Benjamin looked at Oliver and Ella. "I don't want to look back and regret missing your school plays and soccer games because I was stuck in meetings." "Dad's going to be home more?" Oliver asked, his face lighting up. "A lot more," Benjamin confirmed. The transition took a few months, but by fall, Benjamin had stepped down and appointed a capable successor. True to his word, he was much more present in their daily lives. He coached Oliver's soccer team and helped with homework and attended every school event. He spent hours at the foundation, working with Sophie on new initiatives and expansions. They took family vacations, traveling to places like London and Paris, showing their children the world. Sophie watched her husband bloom in this new phase of life. He was happier, more relaxed, fully present in a way he had not been when the weight of the company had been on his shoulders. She fell in love with him all over again. This version of Benjamin who made pancakes on Saturday mornings and taught Ella to ride a bike, and could quote entire passages from Harry Potter, because he had read the books aloud so many times. On their 10th anniversary, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony at the foundation, with Oliver and Ella as their attendants. It was Sophie's idea, a way to celebrate a decade of marriage and recommit to each other in front of their children. Benjamin wrote his own vows, and when he spoke them, there was not a dry eye in the room. "Sophie, 10 years ago I promised to love you for the rest of my life. That was the easiest promise I've ever made, and keeping it has been my greatest joy. You've given me a family, a purpose, a home. You've loved me through good times and hard times, through growth and change. You've been my partner, my best friend, my everything. I promise to keep choosing you every single day for as long as I live." Sophie's own vows were simpler but no less heartfelt. "Benjamin, you walked into my life when I least expected it and showed me what love could be. You've supported my dreams and helped me become the person I was meant to be. You're an amazing father and husband, and I can't imagine my life without you. I promise to keep building this beautiful life with you, to keep falling in love with you over and over, to be your partner in everything." They kissed while Oliver and Ella cheered, and Sophie felt like everything in her life had led to this moment. Not the first kiss, not the wedding, but this moment 10 years in, with their children watching and their whole lives still ahead of them. The years continued to unfold. Oliver grew into a thoughtful teenager, inheriting his parents' love of literature and his father's business acumen. He talked about maybe running the foundation someday or starting his own nonprofit. Ella was artistic and passionate, interested in everything from painting to environmental activism. She kept them all laughing with her quick wit and fierce determination. Sophie and Benjamin grew older together, finding new depths to their relationship with each passing year. They celebrated milestone birthdays and anniversaries, weathered the normal challenges of life and marriage, supported each other through the loss of loved ones, and the joys of watching their children become remarkable people. On their 20th anniversary, they took a trip back to Italy, just the two of them. It was different from their honeymoon, both of them older and carrying the weight and joy of 2 decades together. But it was also familiar, that sense of adventure and discovery they had felt all those years ago. In Venice, walking along the canals at sunset, Benjamin pulled Sophie close. "Do you remember our honeymoon, when we walked these same streets?" "I remember everything," Sophie said. "I remember thinking I was the luckiest person in the world." "I still think that," Benjamin said. "After 20 years, 2 kids, all the ups and downs, you're still the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you," Sophie said simply. "I loved you in that bookstore. I loved you on our wedding day. I loved you when our children were born. And I love you now, maybe most of all, because I know exactly who you are and I choose you anyway." They kissed as the sun set over Venice, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was more than either of them could have dreamed. When they returned home, Oliver was preparing for college and Ella was entering high school. The house felt different, quieter, and Sophie and Benjamin found themselves with more time alone together. They went on spontaneous dates, rediscovered hobbies they had put aside during the busy parenting years, and talked about what the next chapter would look like. Benjamin surprised Sophie one day by showing up at the foundation with lunch and an idea. "I want to write a book," he said. "About building a business with purpose, about balancing success and family, and I want you to help me." They spent the next year working on the project together, Benjamin writing and Sophie editing, just like they had worked together on everything else. The book was published to critical acclaim, and Benjamin donated all the proceeds to literacy charities. They went on a book tour together, and Sophie loved watching him speak passionately about the importance of building a life, not just a career. Oliver went off to college, and the house felt emptier. But it also felt full in new ways, with just the 3 of them, Sophie, Benjamin, and Ella, figuring out their new dynamic. They had family dinners where they actually talked without Oliver and Ella bickering, and weekend mornings where they could sleep late. When Ella left for college 4 years later, Sophie and Benjamin faced empty nest syndrome together. The house that had been so full of noise and activity was suddenly quiet. It was an adjustment, but they had each other, and that made all the difference. They traveled more, spending months at a time in different places, working remotely and exploring new cities. They volunteered together at literacy programs and mentored young entrepreneurs. They became grandparents when Oliver married and had a daughter, and then another when he had a son. And Sophie watched Benjamin cradle his grandchildren with the same tenderness he had shown their own children. On their 30th anniversary, they hosted a big party at the foundation, surrounded by family and friends. 3 decades of marriage, of love and partnership and growth. Their hair was grayer now. There were lines around their eyes, but when Sophie looked at Benjamin, she still saw the man who had walked into her bookstore all those years ago. 30 years, Benjamin said in his toast. 30 years of waking up next to the love of my life. 30 years of building dreams together. 30 years of laughter and tears and everything in between. Sophie, you've been my constant, my home, my everything. Here's to 30 more. Sophie raised her glass, looking around at the life they had created. Their children and grandchildren, their friends and family, the foundation that bore both their names. It all started in a dusty bookstore in the West Village, with a man looking for rare books and finding something infinitely more valuable. To love, Sophie said. To partnership. To the life we've built together. To us. They clinked glasses and kissed, and everyone cheered. And Sophie knew with absolute certainty that walking into that bookstore 3 decades ago and helping a customer find first editions had been the beginning of the greatest story of her life. Not because Benjamin was a billionaire, though the financial security had certainly made things easier, but because he was her person, her partner, her love. They had built something real and lasting, something that would echo through their children and grandchildren for generations to come. That night, lying in bed in the penthouse apartment they still lived in, Sophie turned to Benjamin. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been if you had gone to a different bookstore or if I had called in sick that day?" "I think we would have found each other somehow," Benjamin said. "Some things are just meant to be." "You really believe that?" "I believe that love finds a way," he said, pulling her close. "And I believe that every choice I made, every path I took, led me to you. So yes, I think it was meant to be." Sophie smiled and closed her eyes, perfectly content. Outside, the city lights twinkled, and somewhere in the world, someone else was having their meet cute, starting their own love story. But Sophie's story, the one that had started with a bell chiming above a bookstore door, was still unfolding, still being written day by day, moment by moment, with the man who had become her everything. And they lived happily, deeply, completely in love for all the years that followed.